All right, welcome to the deep dive. This is the place where we try to skip the surface level noise and get right to the core of these really complex ideas. And today we are unpacking a topic that is, it's truly reshaking how we understand human communication. We're talking about Gestalt language processing or GLP.
That's right. And for a lot of people, GLP has been discussed in these very specific kind of narrow contexts, right?
Like scripting or echolalia.
Exactly. Or maybe the specific sequence of language acquisition. But the sources you've brought to the table today, they really compel us to zoom way, way out. They're presenting GLP not as some kind of language quirk, but as a complete, you could almost call it a cognitive ecology.
A cognitive ecology.
A deep foundational architecture of the mind itself.
Okay, let's unpack that because that is a colossal shift in perspective. We are moving far beyond the watered-down checklist version you might find in a training module. So when you say cognitive ecology, you're saying GLP shapes everything, not just speech, but memory, attention, identity itself.
Precisely. And so our mission for you, the listener, is to really explore what this processing architecture genuinely feels like from the inside, especially for autistic individuals who often rely on it. We want to understand how a mind that operates this way actually navigates the world.
And that leads us right to the core question in all this material. What does it actually mean to meet the world not in tiny parsed out pieces, not in sequential steps, but in these emotional atmospheric constellations?
To really get it, I think we have to start with the foundational contrast. The source material lays out these two dominant cognitive architectures.
Right. So on one side, we have what's called analytic processing. And this is the one most of us just assume is universal, right? It's linear, step by step.
It's part to whole. It parses reality into these discrete little atomized components. So phonemes build into words, words build into sentences.
Rules and sequence are king.
Exactly. And then you have Gestalt processing. And this mind meets the world in wholeness, in these constellations.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to assemble all the parts first. It just, it grasps the pattern, the atmosphere, the coherence of the whole situation instantly.
And the pieces come later.
The pieces come later, yeah. Only after the context is securely felt.
This is so important because it completely reframes that common idea of chunking.
Oh, absolutely.
When analytic minds talk about chunking, it's usually like a shortcut, an efficient segment. But that's not what's happening here.
No, not at all. What Gestalt processors are storing are these rich, dense moments. Think of them as sensory, emotional, linguistic scenes.
Yeah.
The sources describe them really powerfully as exchanges with flavor.
Exchanges with flavor. I love that.
It's not just the words, it's the whole experience. So language isn't a machine. It's not a toolset of syntax. It's inhabited as a landscape.
A landscape, something you walk through and feel, not something you just build with. That suggests meaning isn't purely logical. It's physical, almost atmospheric.
It is entirely physical. The text explains that meaning arrives as a full-bodied sensation, a knowing that arcs across the nervous system like weather.
Wow.
So you don't just know something is true or relevant. You feel the rhythm, the cadence, the emotional charge, the relational subtext. All of it, all at once. It's an immersive knowing.
So, okay, if meaning is stored this way, as a whole, flavored contextual moment, then when a young child uses what sounds like a script or echolalia, it's not just copying. What's the goal?
They are reaching for resonance. They're using the full phrase, the whole gestalt, to communicate the emotional truth of the original context it came from. The goal isn't to exchange linear information about right now. It's to evoke a feeling, a memory, a relational need tied to that first charged language moment.
Which means the developmental path is completely inverted from the analytic model. It has to move whole to part.
That's it. It honors context and connection first, way before the complex, really effortful task of segmentation, of breaking down that whole gestalt into individual words, can even start. It's just a profoundly different kind of intelligence.
And this new GLP framework, it really changes how we talk about language challenges, doesn't it? For so long, the clinical term was just nonverbal.
Right.
But the source material is so clear about how inadequate that label is.
It's problematic because it was always being interpreted through an analytic lens. So it signaled a lack of language, a drop-off, or some kind of collapse. It frames the difference as a deficiency.
But the internal experience described in the material was the opposite of absence. The mind was saturated with words, with meaning,
Hmm.
but they lived in these non-linear, purely emotional forms. It was an overflow, not an emptiness.
Exactly. The vivid internal world only felt unspeakable because the standard linear tools speaking sentence by sentence, they just couldn't capture the density of the Gestalt meaning.
Which is why the framework of Gestalt language processing is, as the source says, such a truer, cleaner fit.
It names the architecture. It describes the fundamental shape, the operating system of the mind. It doesn't name a failure or an absence.
That's a critical distinction, especially when we talk about being under stress.
Precisely. The source notes that when a GLP individual is stressed or overwhelmed or, unmasked, they might go back to a pure Gestalt mode. So communication might shift entirely to charged silence or tone or just those powerful relational phrases. And that's not a communication breakdown. If you recognize it, it's the mind using its most coherent system of meaning-making under pressure.
This shift in naming, it has to reframe the whole growth trajectory. We have to move away from comparing developmental delay with a different developmental pathway.
The term delay, it inherently implies deficiency, right? Lateness.
Yeah.
It uses this single, rigid, analytic staircase as the measure of success, and any divergence is marked as a failure.
But the sources advocate so strongly for pathway.
Because it honors the integrity of the GLP structure. When growth is holed apart, it isn't going to be linear. It's described as tidal, recursive. You revisit things, you deepen the coherence before the next outward skill appears.
It's prioritizing deep relational understanding over just sticking to a timeline that some analytic expectation dictated. It's intelligence that grows differently, not intelligence that's late.
And that brings us to, I think, the most illuminating part of this deep dive.
Okay.
If GLP is a cognitive architecture, then language is just the tip of the iceberg. This is a field-based cognition that shapes every single domain of life.
This is where we see the ripple effect across the entire system. Okay, let's start with domain 1, attention and sensory experience. How does this constellation approach affect basic perception?
Well, while an analytic processor is filtering, sorting, prioritizing consummation into these neat categories, focusing on the voice, maybe tuning out the air conditioner,
The Gestalt processor perceives everything at once.
they ingest the entire field.
So their attention is tracking coherence, not categories. If the whole atmosphere is off, that's what gets flagged.
Absolutely. Think about a standard room. An analytic mind hears the conversation. A Gestalt mind takes in the conversation, plus the specific quality of the fluorescent light, the faint, high-pitched whine of the fridge, the exact posture of the person speaking.
And the emotional tension left over from the meeting that just ended.
All of it, all of that input forms one indivisible Gestalt. So if the light quality suddenly shifts, the entire feel of that moment is shattered.
That explains both the potential for this profound richness and experience, but also the immediate threat of sensory overwhelm. If sounds carry emotional color and textures carry entire histories, then the sensory field is never neutral, is it?
It's never neutral. It's either transcendent beauty or, instant drowning. It's a very high-fidelity system, but one that is constantly vulnerable to that atmospheric dissonance.
Okay, let's move to domain 2, memory and identity. If analytic memory is like a filing cabinet that stores discrete facts, what is Gestalt memory?
It's nonlinear. And it's intensely relational. It doesn't store facts so much as it stores these rich, interconnected emotional ecosystems. So, for example, a favorite phrase from your childhood doesn't just retrieve the sentence, it retrieves the exact temperature of the room, the specific feeling of safety or danger, and the whole affective landscape of that original moment.
So accessing a memory is like rebooting a virtual reality simulation of it.
Yes, exactly. And that feeds directly into the concept of identity. For a Gestalt processor, identity isn't a fixed list of attributes you can put on a resume. It's stored gesturally, as a felt coherence, a sense of relational integrity.
But wouldn't that make identity feel very fluid, maybe unstable?
It makes it adaptive. So when a powerful new Gestalt enters the system, say a huge life transition or a moment of deep new understanding, the entire internal map rearranges itself to maintain coherence with this new truth.
The sources call this adaptive complexity.
Which is a sign of intelligent self-organization. It's not instability.
That distinction is so crucial for self-acceptance. Okay, finally, domain 3, relational attunement. If a Gestalt mind prioritizes atmosphere over social scripts, how do they navigate social interaction?
They read the whole system of a person as one single living Gestalt. This includes tone, microexpressions, pauses, physical stillness. and especially the contradictions between what's being said and what's not. They're essentially reading the relational field.
So the languages they need are clarity, warmth, and congruence. What happens when they encounter ambiguity or someone performing?
That ambiguity, that performance, or just a lack of congruence between what's said and what's felt, it immediately feels like static or rupture. The source describes it so powerfully as a sudden drop in oxygen.
Wow.
It becomes instantly unsafe because the atmospheric gestalt, which is the primary source of all relational information, has just dissolved into dissonance.
We spent a lot of time on the architecture, which is great, but let's try to ground this now in the daily experience of the GLP mind. How does this whole-to-part functioning actually show up?
Yeah, that's a great idea.
The source material gives this wonderful analogy using a writer's process. For this writer, when they approach a memory, it isn't just recall. It's something much more profound. It's retrieval as re-immersion.
That is the feeling of gestalt memory, right there. The past isn't something you view through a window. It's a living field that rises at full volume, full of texture and sound. When the writer describes a memory, they are literally standing inside the original moment again.
So they aren't recounting a story, they are living it.
Yes.
Which means the task of writing, or even just communicating, isn't composition, it's more like transcription. The goal is just to translate that entire atmosphere, that feeling state, without breaking its coherence.
And that's why their language emerges in those long tidal waves, as the source puts it. It's carrying the full weight of the moment.
And this also explains the use of recurring language, like the word constellation itself, or other key phrases we see in the text. Why does that repetition happen?
It's not redundancy. It's not a limited vocabulary. It is coherence. These recurring phrases, they function as gestalts themselves. They're like these compact containers, almost like highly compressed digital files of complex conceptual and emotional truth. They're actually very efficient.
They become crucial landmarks.
That's the perfect word.
Yeah.
Because the internal world is nonlinear in title. These reliable resonant phrases act as stable points. They bridge the nonlinear reality inside with the demands of linear external communication. The word returns because the underlying cognitive shape it describes keeps returning.
This deep dive has really shown that Gestalt processing is, well, it's a deeply relational, highly integrated, and intensely human way of making meaning. It's just fundamentally different from the segmentation and sequencing we typically expect.
And it's one that, as the sources note, inherently struggles to be measured or validated by what they call the industrial logic of segmentation, measurement, and control. The logic preferred by analytic culture.
Yeah.
The entire framework, from communication to identity, it's all about honoring coherence over sequence.
I think the biggest takeaway here, really, for all of us, is about widening the field of what we accept. We aren't just naming a language difficulty. We're recognizing a valid, intelligent, and complete cognitive architecture that has always been coherent.
Absolutely. And it demands that we adjust our expectations and the environments we create for communication. So if we accept that our society, our schools, our workplaces, our standard communication protocols are built primarily on the assumption of analytic part-to-whole linear processing, this raises a really essential question for you, the listener. What fundamental aspects of relational intelligence, of atmospheric understanding, and of that deep, physical, felt sense, what are we collectively missing out on by consistently misreading and mismeasuring the intricate, powerful architecture of the Gestalt mind?
Something to chew on long after the sound fades. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.